says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell-Gillard!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me for a news and preview podcast. We're rolling them in together this week on the back of that sort of late start due to Anzac round is my good mate Sixties and my good mate Clint. Before I get him in here, let's hit the stinger.
News team, assemble!
Sixties, Clint, how you holding up, boys?
Oh, mate, what a busy day it's been. We're actually recording this on Tuesday night, and we've already caught up, twice already today, 40. We recorded the special edition of the podcast for the SG Ball Grand Final this morning, added in our chat with Nathan Brown at 2:30 this afternoon, and here we are tonight recording the news and preview podcast. So it's been a pretty full-on day as far as I'm concerned. What about you, Clint? How are you holding up?
It's been an interesting week, gentlemen. Apart from the Eels going down, some of my other sporting teams went down, and I spent the rest of my weekend doing kids' birthdays. So I've been politely saying to my wife across the weekend, I'm 0-7 and very hungry for a win this week.
Oh, mate, we need it. And just before we get into our terrific sponsors, I should mention that with it being a Friday night game this week, we're back at Paraleagues in Jack's Bar and Grill straight after the game on Friday night. So we probably kick off about half an hour after the game finishes. So I'd like to think we'll be on about 8:30, something like that. What do you think, mate?
Yes, that sounds about right. Hopefully on the back of a Parramatta win.
Oh, let's just say, come and join us in Jack's Bar and Grill in Parramatta Leagues after Friday night's game, where we dissect the Eels win over the night.
Yeah, that's a nice spin on it. Although, we'll get to it later, but Newcastle having a very, very good start to the season.
Yes, they are. And for people who are just catching this podcast now, this is actually a news and preview podcast. So we're going to put it all into one because we do have that quick turnaround from the weekend's matches into this, and especially with team lists only released today, we're cramming it all in, and we do have. I'm going to keep directing people back to it. That dedicated preview podcast for the SG Ball Grand Final. So please have a listen to that.
And before I let you run wild with the run sheet there, 60s, a quick shout out to the two sponsors of the tip sheet, Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and star partners, NRL, Auburn, and Parramatta. Show couldn't be done without them, so massive thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a little bit of news that we still want to touch on coming out of last week. It's not brand new, hot off the presses news, but we still want to talk about it. Reg's injury, we've had a bit more details confirmed by the Eels that there's no hip fracture, but we're still looking at an 8 to 10 week period out of the game. We've had the suspension now of Payne Haas, with it being determined to be a hip drop tackle. Final thoughts on this, fellas, coming out of that game where there was no penalty against Payne Haas. There was no sin binning. What's your thoughts coming out of it now?
I think for me, gents, it's a real pain in the Eels' Haas. To lose Reg the 8 to 10 weeks it's massive, but when you consider the alternative, a fractured hip probably would have been upwards of a 6-month injury. So I guess it's the best of the worst. It's the best of the worst case scenarios available to us. But one week out, and we can talk about intent and touch on that in a little bit. But it doesn't change the circumstances around the injury. And the fact of the matter is, we're going to be out with one of our key players, and not just forwards, but players. Very key part of our makeup for a third of the competition.
Yeah, like,
do you want to add anything on there, mate?
yeah, well, echoing what Clint said, it's obviously the best of a bad set of outcomes in terms of the serious injuries. While it's not a fractured hip and that's not, potentially career threatening, we all know that when you're an absolute monstrous unit or mountainous unit like Reg, that those groin injuries, and given his history of groin injuries, they're going to linger. So it now becomes a concern for the remainder of the season until he can get a proper preseason back under his belt. For me, though, besides the actual injury to Reg, which is obviously the biggest concern, but for me, the other thing that really rubs me the wrong way is how much of a catastrophic failure of the system it was. After all this talk about don't call it a crackdown, we're getting rid of hip drops, this is the mechanics of a hip drop. If you do a hip drop, you're off. What happened? Like, how can that go through? Payne Haas get up immediately saying, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't do anything wrong, knowing that he'd done something wrong, and the bunker to sit there and say, you know what, not only is it not a penalty, or it's not a sin bin, it's not a penalty. And, yes, Parramatta...
Has it even...
Sorry,
mate, has it even gone through to the keeper as far as the media's concerned?
Well, and honestly, because of the way the Anzac round worked, obviously, if that was battery of Tuesday games, the two classic Anzac matches there, we didn't get the usual round recap or breakdown that he does, or we haven't seen it so far. He did do a breakdown of why each of those 3 tackles in the Eels-Broncos game was a hip drop, but didn't address the fact that Payne Haas wasn't sin binned. And I know, going back to the comment section of our instant review, our instant reaction podcast, Sixties, there was an element there that were critical of us not being critical enough of the team, which I would say, A, you didn't listen to the podcast, you just looked at the title or the write-up, but B, me being absolutely disgusted with the process, the official process of the bunker, doesn't mean that I can't also be unhappy with the team. They're not mutually exclusive. I can think that there was a catastrophic failure of the systems and also think that the Eels shot themselves in both feet in the first half. And that's what happened.
Yeah, absolutely, because what we saw there was a performance from the Eels, especially in the first half, where they didn't deserve to be in the contest.
No.
They just didn't. They were passive. They just let the game happen to them rather than taking the game to the Broncos. And we know that the Broncos are a team which thrives on confidence. They didn't take the game to the Broncos. So we saw the sort of performance that happened in that first half. The ridiculous part about all of this is that if the decision had have been made to put Payne Haas to the sin bin, as he should have been,
well, the nature of the charge would
the Eels could have manufactured a win out of it. It might have been undeserved. However, it would have been right in the circumstance.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll never know. We'll never know whether they would have been able to take advantage of a two player having more than 2 players than the Broncos. So we're robbed of that. And you have to look at it and you go, that was a massive fail. There is no other way to look at it.
No, and that's sport. Sometimes you play bad but get the win because of circumstance, and that was what should have happened for Parramatta. And the other thing too...
And when it's... Sorry, I was just going to say, the thing is too, this, again, and we've talked about this before, referees, we're quite accepting of the fact that referees will make mistakes on the run in the game. However, at that, they had so many reviews that they could take of that tackle. And the decision was made, obviously, that's not a hip drop tackle. That is the only way you can look at it, that the bunker and the on-field referee made the call, that is not a hip drop tackle. Mm-hmm. So if the referees don't understand what a hip drop tackle is, it doesn't matter how much Graham Annesley says, it's quite straightforward about what a hip drop tackle is. If the referees do not understand that it's simple, then we've got a failure.
Yep.
As you said, there is a massive failure in the system. They can talk all they like about the media should be able to understand it, or coaches should be able to understand it.
But the most important set of people
that need to understand it as much as anyone else are the match officials.
Yep. And the other thing that really rubs me the wrong way is that the nature of the Payne Haas charge in the wake of the game would indicate that it was closer to a send-off than a sin bin. He got a grade 2 dangerous contact charge. So not only did they get it wrong in terms of missing the penalty in the sin bin, they got it, like I said, catastrophically wrong. So, yes, Parramatta played poorly, and yes, they had a bit of a comeback at the end, but yes, the referees also botched this one massively. And I say referees, including obviously the video ref or the third official.
So let's look at now impact of Reg's injury on us. Team lists have come out, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But Wiramu Greg has been called into the starting lineup, but we've got a very skinny roster at the moment. We've got injuries. We've got 27 players of the top 30 signed. That's it. We're still 3 players short of the top 30, as far as we are aware. So if there's been some sort of internal upgrade, we're not aware of it at the moment. So where do we stand now with being without a player for this extended period of time, gents?
It's a hard question to answer because I think we were discussing prior to going live that Brad Arthur in his presser today indicated that they're not going to go out and try and replace Reg. Now, you can take with that of what you will, and maybe a carefully worded phrase there from our beloved coach. But the fact of the matter is that we're short some quality in the middle, and we don't necessarily. You're not going to replace Reg, but you want to get someone who is an equal in terms of a prototype and style of player that can hopefully replicate RCG in the aggregate and provide a little bit of balance to our team as we manage our time without him available to us.
Well, Clint, weren't we in that situation, even with Reg in the team, that we were a middle short anyway in the roster?
Absolutely, and it's only intensified that situation. Heaven forbid if Junior goes down too, then we're in some real strife.
Oh, please. Have you got some wood to touch somewhere?
I'm knocking on the wooden desk right now, boys.
I've touched it in the process, gents. So I'm absolving myself of that one.
Well, the best thing is I haven't said it. If I'd uttered those words, we'd be in major trouble.
We might just cull it there and prevent any bad juju getting out there.
Look, the concern is surely we just have a look at the New South Wales Cup results, and we saw the Eels New South Wales Cup team travel over to New Zealand and cop an absolute hiding. We've seen footage of the tries that were scored, and we're talking about arm-grabbing defence that was going on out there. It was, it's a bit tough to comment because we're really, without seeing the game, we like to be able to call the game. We like to be able to see the game when we're talking about lower grade matches so that we're coming in with informed opinions. We're just going on this based on what we've seen in the highlights, what we've seen with the scoreline. It's not pretty either way. So unless there was a lot of bad luck that went their way, which it's hard to imagine in such a lopsided scoreline, you've got the next grade down that's not really applying any pressure or necessarily providing answers to who BA can bring into the team in the event of injury or suspension.
I think the fact of the matter is you might have been a little bit kind in your assessment there, Sixties. They're applying zero pressure. Maybe apart from a couple of select performances over the course of the New South Wales Cup season proper to date, but there's no one really putting their hand up saying, you know what, I might be a good option for you. I'd probably absolve someone like Luca Moretti from that, and the first couple performance of Tony Mataea, who hasn't been able to replicate that form since. But there's no one there saying, pick me, I can help solve the problem. And when you find yourself in the position we are, a very unusual position of only 27 players contracted and one of our big names going down, in a position where we're all experiencing problems, and on top of that, who is available to potentially step up isn't even doing it in the lower grade. Jesus, there's some issues.
Yeah, and that to me is the biggest concern. We're looking who in the pack in the New South Wales Cup is ready to step up into the NRL, and we're now struggling. And the hardest thing would be as well for the coaches when you're looking at such a a result that's so lopsided, and they hadn't played well in the previous 2 weeks. On top of that, they copped a hiding from the Bulldogs, wasn't it?
And then got past the Tigers or the Western Suburbs Magpies in a real ugly game on Easter Monday.
Yeah, so when you look at those performances and you go, if there's someone that's giving their all in that grade, and you mentioned Luca Moretti and probably Tony Matteelli's form has dropped off a bit in the last few weeks. He started off the season on fire. Jake Arthur's he's doing everything he possibly can at halfback, but we're losing the middle badly in these last few matches, and until we start winning the middle in that grade, then I don't know that those results are necessarily going to change. And again, that makes it harder to identify when your team's getting beaten like that, to identify players who are able to come up and do the job. I guess that's why coaches are paid the money that they are, to be able to sort through whatever garbage they might see on the field in the way of the form that's being shown, and find a diamond performance in there somewhere, or at least someone that's just given it absolutely everything that they've got. But are those players in the positions where we need to be filling right now? And right now, that's very much the middle. But again, we're sitting on 27 players.
Yeah, and part of me working backwards from what you initially proposed, Sixties, and I'll get to Wiremu later, but starting with that whole roster issue is I'm still miffed as to why the whole talk of an X Factor signing was leaked in the first place. Because we're just...
to me, I think it's pretty obvious. In retrospect,
you're putting up the vacancy sign and saying, hey, we've got space?
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, this is just my take. It's not... and please don't take this as gospel, people. But me looking at it in retrospect now is like putting up an advertisement to player managers. We have some money. This is what we are chasing. Let us know who you've got. That to me seems to be like, and you know what? That might be a way you'd go about it, but. But we've still got, you'd have to think 2 roster spots that should be being filled now, 2 of them.
Yeah, even if it's just brick and mortar players,
maybe I'm just not clear now on dates when these things were supposed to be done by, because it was always our understanding that the 28th player had to be locked up before the start of the season, and then the 29th player by another date, and then the 30th player is the 1st of August or something like that.
Yeah.
So so I'm a little bit confused at the moment, and maybe the club can put out a statement to clarify where things are at, or I mean, maybe it's something that they don't want to delve into with a general statement like that. I don't know.
The danger of making that move they did, Sixties, if that's the case, of putting up that sign saying, hey, talented players, please apply, is that you've put out, the same broadcast to fans, and now you're sitting here just about 2 months later and nothing's changed. And if anything, the team's in a bigger hole because, like you said, it's a top 27, which isn't even a top 27. Wanga Blake hurt himself in the New South Wales Cup.
Yep.
Jeremiah Masia isn't an option, to play first grade. So, you need to make
now
moves.
Out,
and you don't factor for Reg to be out. Obviously, like that is just one of the unfortunate realities of playing football. Is you didn't count on your best, or one of your best forwards, if not your best forward, being out for 2 to 3 months. But that happened. But now you got to figure something out. You can't look to your New South Wales Cup team. Can you even roll a dice on someone from the flag? Not really. Like I've got big raps on Jonte. Big Jonte Jr., but throwing him in the first grade right now doesn't seem like an ideal situation. So
no. Well, he's only just getting a taste of New South Wales Cup. Yeah. He's mostly playing flag, but then start factoring in the others. So you've got Bailey Simonson's out for a week. So again,
your list
with the concussion protocol. So again, what we're talking about here is players that are on that 27 list, that 27 player list. We've only got 24 who are NRL contracted, who are technically who are physically available this week, physically available. So, and of course, included in that are players who are now either playing jersey flag or playing or are coming off the bench for New South Wales Cup due to form. So it's
and look,
it's a
you're
very
not
skinny. It's a very skinny roster right now.
And that's not a full-on accusation, is it, 60? Because you're not always going to get everything right when it comes to roster construction. In a top 30, you're going to have hits and misses, and the Eels have done a fantastic job finding value in the cracks and in the guys that have been overlooked in the last sort of 5 or so years. But they didn't get it right necessarily this year. So
we don't want panic signings right now.
Exactly. That is the worst, and I think that's what Brad Arthur was trying to sort of intimate there was. We're not going to go to the market for the sake of going to the market to replace Reg and make a short-sighted decision now, that's going to hurt us down the road. But on the flip side, there are guys out there. I don't know how you can prime off from the opposition team. Sorry, but you've got to be aggressive and you've got to try and make something happen. Find a guy that can help you now, but also help you down the road.
Well, I wonder as well whether there have been negotiations going on with players who aren't available until next year. What that then becomes is having difficulty filling the spots just for the rest of this season.
Well, on that point, Sixties, I wanted to touch on another possibility that might be at play here, because I think you're probably somewhat on the mark there, and just to preface for all our listeners as well, I'm not privy to any information. This is pure speculation from my end, but we still haven't officially announced Mitchell Moses re-signing. There's an understanding that he has, and perhaps the club is also investigating as a part of all of this, structuring a deal that allows us to front load some of his contract into this season to allow there to be more funds available for subsequent seasons, and hopefully secure some of that future talent that you're touching on there for 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to be patient about, so I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate there. I was playing the voice of the supporters in what I was saying before about being concerned that we're operating on a very skinny roster, because that's just a fact that we're operating on a very skinny roster, and we're trying to speculate as to why this is the case right now. And I mean, the obvious thing is that in terms of who's available right now, that the options are somewhat limited. We know that. That's you essentially you have to find a player who's not happy with where they're at right now and wants to leave right now. How you go about that, how you go about finding that's all going to be behind the scenes stuff. It's probably going to probably take the form of a player manager reaching out.
You got to think that with Jack Wighton joining South Sydney, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck joining the New Zealand Warriors, that even with just those two teams, there's going to be opportunities to look at players that could be cap casualties then. Or you look at teams like Cronulla, where they've got an absolute embarrassment of riches in the back line right through to their reserve grade team and the Jets. There's got to be some way to make something happen. So
yeah, and this is where it probably gets frustrating that you don't know, and as supporters, there's probably things that we're not entitled to know because it's negotiations are going on. Parramatta have made it a point that anything that is negotiations is done confidentially. And as I said, I can speculate that maybe the problem with filling roster spots right now is that roster spots might be filled going forward into next year, and that they're not about to be announced. Look, Parramatta hasn't done what some other clubs do. I know that they've honoured signatures contracts in the past and the wishes of the players who've signed up by not announcing it when it's done, because the players have got a contract that they're playing out. So, and oftentimes the news only leaks out when it comes out through other sources. And we know that. We know that Parramatta has been the sort of club that when they've signed people from elsewhere, that they don't announce it straight away. They wait a particular period of time. So maybe that's a reason. But we should probably now move on, fellas.
Before we do, we started that by talking about Wiremu Greg as well, and I do want to give him a shout out because I think over the last fortnight he's produced some of his best football as an Eel, and obviously a couple of good games do not make a season for him, but this is a case where the door shuts on Reg for a couple of months and opens for him, and this is a huge chance now for him to step up and be the guy. And it's not going to be, he's going to have his problems, but he'll have his, struggles and downturns across 2 months plus of football. But this is a big chance for him to. And is this a contract year for him?
Yeah, it's a contract year.
Yeah. So even if he doesn't stay as an Eel, and obviously if he plays well, you want him to stay as an Eel. But this is a huge chance for him to write his own story now.
Absolutely true. So let's get into the team list, mate. You've got the Eels 3 grades of team list to read out, or how about we leave that now till the preview with the team list, because we are putting this all together.
Yeah. We'll go through the team list as part of a team as a preview. Sounds good.
Okay. So, mate, let's get on to the NRL news right now, and of course, the biggest talking point in the NRL is that prize signature of Jack Wighton that the South Sydney team has been able to secure for a 4-year deal, and it's drawn the much expected Ricky Stuart reaction about just what sort of a deal it is, because and greater transparency, because he was offered a lot more money to stay with the Raiders. I think he was offered a lot more money to go to somewhere like the Dolphins than what he was offered by the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So is that chance of a premiership worth an extra, up to $300,000 more? You'd accept $300,000 less to get a premiership per season.
A season, not across a lifetime, yeah.
Yeah, so what's your thoughts? Has Ricky got a case?
Oh, look, you could just feel Ricky seething through that press release, couldn't you? He was obviously furious of how things have played out. And I clown on Ricky, and a lot of Parramatta fans clown on Ricky because of the way he departed the club. And even though I think you mentioned recently Sixties, you could understand why he left the club given the state of affairs at Parramatta at the time. Just the manner in which he did it obviously left a sour taste. But in this case, yeah, you can sort of make a joke about Canberra and at their expense, but God, you got to feel for him. That they stood by Jack Wighton through a lot of off-field garbage, and propped him up to be the pillar of our team, and he's sort of done the run on him here. And this is a big test for the NRL, because I don't know if they've got hard and fast rules about market value and notional value and how much you can salary sacrifice. This is going to be, in a way, a landmark case about setting standards for what you can sacrifice to, quote unquote, chase the premiership. So, yeah, very, very big ramifications here when it comes to the big teams. Sort of, when you talk about the big teams, obviously, the Roosters, the Rabbitohs, Brisbane and Melbourne, I'd say, are probably the high rollers when it comes to luxury spending in the NRL, what they can get away with under the pretense of winning a premiership.
Yeah, the teams that are likely to have those third-party sponsors, and this is, do we have a suspicion that there's a third-party deal that's involved with this? Because
the owner is one of the wealthiest men in the country, given his acting career. So I'm sure that and anyone that watches,
and he's just one of the part owners there. 40. You've got to consider that Mike Cannon-Brooks, the CEO of Atlassian, also is a part owner of South Sydney.
Exactly, and these are sort of conversations you have. We've got to be very careful, because anyone that watched 360 tonight saw Paul Kent have to make a very quick retraction on what he said about a potential boxing promotion happening that might sweeten the deal for Jack Wighton, and had to walk it back after the commercial break.
Yeah, it's again, as you said, you do in this instance feel for Canberra, but even this season, his actions are surely going to go close to totally derailing their current season, because you've had the reported comments that he's going there to South Sydney in his quest to win a premiership. So as a leader at the Raiders club, he's literally saying, I don't think you blokes that I'm playing with, and I don't think you as the coach are good enough to get a premiership in the next 4 years.
Is that a semi-deliberate plan too? Because what so often happens when you sign a player for next year these days, you open the door for a mid-season transfer. So,
well, you would like to think that if something like that eventuated, that, I mean, would I guess they work on these values of the players when they move partway through a season. But look, you'd hope that the Raiders would stick to their guns and not do an immediate release, and like in the worst case scenario, you run the bloke around in New South Wales.
Well,
Cup.
that's what I was going to say. If and you got to imagine that Ricky's going to be pretty prickly about this, just by nature, given what's happened. That if there was a burning of the bridges, he would just drop him to the cup to knock on effect New South Wales Cup. So, and not
I don't think Ricky's been renowned as the most forgiving.
And look, like I said, like he's been the butt of many of our jokes and whatnot, but he's got plenty of reason to be upset in this case. He and the club have done the right thing by Wighton, and look, that's not a tacit agreement from Jack that he has to stay as a Canberra Raider, but given what was done for him in circumstances, they could have cut bait with him pretty easily. I feel like.
There's a sense of moral reciprocation.
Yeah, exactly.
That you feel just hasn't taken place.
Yeah, and it's always odd for Ricky to be on the moral high ground, given some of the stuff he says and does in the NRL. But I think that's the case here, and he has every right to feel pretty aggrieved about not his trust being broken, because everyone knows that the NRL is a business more so than ever. But yeah, he did the right thing by Jack and helped forge him into one of the best players in the competition, and his reward now is seeing Jack not just walk out the end of a contract, but activate a clause to get out prematurely.
Yeah, well, let's move from what is potentially a concerning area when it comes to NRL contracts to something that might be somewhat exciting if it comes to fruition, and that's the talk of staging season opening games over in Las Vegas in the United States. We've been there before, haven't we, in terms of plans and schemes and that sort of thing. What's your thoughts? Is this gonna come to fruition, and what would it mean for the game if it does?
Well, it's something of interest to keep track of, right? An exciting proposition, but as you rightly touched on, we've travelled this path before, and we probably continue to do so a little bit wearily. Noting that there's a lot of things that have to move before this becomes anything official. But the notion of holding a game in Las Vegas, yes, incredibly exciting. Comes with a lot of risk management concerns for a number of reasons. Particularly when you consider the proposition of, or most importantly, the proposition of 4 NRL squads being based in a weekend in Las Vegas, and the city of sin associated with a sport that's not always been known for the best of off-field behaviour or best of off-field reputations. There's going to have to be a lot of contingencies put in place, and a lot of babysitting taking place as well, I dare say. But we should always be looking at opportunities to grow the game and to grow the footprint of the game. Las Vegas is probably a choice that appeals because some of the success that the World Sevens has had on that circuit. There's obviously an established market for some form of rugby. Likewise, we could utilize the star power that we have associated with the game, with famous supporters who have both Hollywood and international profiles as draw cards. Likewise, the new Raiders Stadium that opened up there, I think only 2 or 3 years ago. I've personally not been inside it, but gone past it. It's one of the most impressive structures I think I've ever seen. There's a world of opportunity, but you have to see ultimately the business case has to stack up, and you don't want to risk this being a junket where a lot of money is thrown at it for not much return. You want to see some quality data that's informing these decisions, not let it be some type of as I said before, junket and I guess podium for the NRL execs to stand on, but ultimately doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's important as well, is that it has to be part of a bigger plan, doesn't it? Like you can go and stage the game there, and I'm sure there is a bigger plan, but it'd be great if it does come off, that plan is revealed. Is it part of just a promotion of the NRL? Is it some sort of move that's going to help to grow the game in some way in the United States? Is it going to have implications for having broadcast rights of NRL games in a bigger way in the United States? What's the plan there? There's a lot of logistical stuff, as you hinted at there, Clint, because the players that go over there, they're probably going to have to go over and be involved in promotions for the best part of the week and squeeze in their training and promotions during that time. You'd imagine that post-game that they've got to fit recovery and a flight from the United States back to Australia. And then you're obviously thinking, how does that impact the next round? Do they work in buys for those teams early in the season?
And the other thing too is the broadcasting crossover. So I watch a lot of NFL, and if you're talking about playing in primetime slots in the American time zones on the East Coast, a 10 a.m. start, so an early start for them over there would be a 3 a.m. start here, I think, so thereabouts. So, or maybe it's because I'm thinking of West Coast, East Coast transfers here because I support the Seahawks. So, and if you're playing on the West Coast, which would be, if you go to LA or whatnot, in that case, then primetime slot there would start closer to 10:30 or 11:30 in the morning over here. So it's very awkward for broadcasting to your main audience in terms of Australia. So you got to get that figured out too. Clint raised a great point about the star power, which immediately sort of marries the South Sydney Rabbitohs to one of those games, because obviously Russell Crowe is the biggest draw card in terms of Hollywood for NRL. I'm trying to think of anyone else that would actually be fairly relevant. I know that like all the
you have the
Hugh Jackman's a Manly supporter.
Hugh Jackman will come out for Manly. That's another good shout out there. I know
our very own Eels is followed by
the Mentalist.
The Mentalist, Simon Baker.
Yeah, Simon Baker. So there's options there. But I would say that Manly and South Sydney are now immediately married to that concept of the two season openers there. And then you probably look to put the Glamour clubs in there, which brings you back to the Roosters and Broncos or Melbourne. And the Broncos have got branding crossover with Denver, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. That could be seen as a good thing. The Cowboys too, obviously, but you wouldn't bring them across from Australia because Dallas Cowboys are just on a completely different level to the North Queensland Cowboys. That's not a knock to North Queensland, by the way. But yeah, it's this is it the final frontier? Is that the way you'd spin it? Well, John Reebok would go say China was the final frontier, I think, right? He was big for playing the season openers over there, but I don't know. Like we spoke to Ron, remember Sixties, and about the opportunities for league there, and the timing would actually be pretty good because Super Bowl takes place in February for the Americans, and you get that couple of weeks hangover, and then they have a chance to reset and look at something new and fun. So maybe you can cash in on the timing there. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know. It's tough because you want to make a footprint, but you got to remember that America is a country that has a lot of big time sports, not just NFL. You've got baseball, basketball, ice hockey, There's, there've been a number.
Even the MLS soccer has quite.
Yeah, that's right. The MLS is actually, it's kind of a big deal there now with all the international signings they bring in, and below those top tier sports, you've had a whole host of wannabe second tier American football organizations just fail, and it's competitive, isn't it? So, yeah, I mean, I don't blame the NRL for wanting to try, and I will support them in trying. But this might be a case too of you can sink resources in and you can have a real crack at it, but the sunk cost fallacy might be a real thing here at some point.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of watch this space for just how far this actually progresses this time, because, as I said, there's been false dawns with taking a game to the United States in the past. There's been false dawns about getting the game really started in the United States as a legitimate code over there. It just hasn't happened. It probably should have happened, but it is a big investment to make, and I think obviously taking over 4 teams for an event is an investment, but it has to be an investment with a purpose. Now, just on the last weekend's games, do you have concerns about the pitch invader that happened at the Anzac Day match between the Roosters and the Dragons?
I'll jump in here because I do. Obviously, this one ended with the guy wanting a hug, and that's kind of a funny, goofy end to a guy doing the pitch invasion. But I'm old enough, and I say this is obviously you're junior here, 60s, but I'm old enough to remember what happened to Monica Seles in tennis, and all it takes is one bad fan on a bad day, and suddenly someone's getting stabbed. So yeah, pitch invasions. Yeah, they're wacky and funny most of the time, and everyone has a laugh as security struggles to bring down the guy. But, God, all it takes, I said, is one bad day, and the game's changed forever.
Yeah, so we're looking at this stage that security. It's a bit of a reminder to security and the obviously the security systems that are employed at the stadium to be a little bit more vigilant. You'd hate to have a situation where you do have like wire or higher fences or what have you to separate the fans from the players.
I don't think we'll get to that point, or hopefully we don't. But the other side of the equation is the code of conduct of fans and the responsibility of fans. Respect the playing arena. Those are professionals out there doing their job. You've parted with your hard-earned money to get there. Understand that. But that doesn't afford you the right to break the rules. You have to stay within the confines of the code of conduct. Respectfully watch the players from behind the fence, and you're rewarded with the opportunity of being able to go watch your football team or whatever sport that you're following the next time you want to go do it. This fan probably got a much lighter wallet and likely, whether it's been reported or not, some form of a ban as a result of this.
Was alcohol a factor? Has that been reported at all?
I'm not privy to the details of it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but even if it wasn't, it's not an excuse or anything to lean on either way. As I said, there's a fan code of conduct that conditions of entry that exist whenever you enter any public venue.
Yeah. Now we've got the other big news to come out is that CommBank Stadium is going to host the first women's State of Origin this year, which is going to be on the 1st of June. That's big news with the staging of it. First of all, I mean, it's now a standalone event, but it's 2 games. It's a 2-game series.
First ever proper series.
Of them. Yep. So exciting news for the women's game, and I guess exciting news for Western Sydney being able to get out there and cheer the women's New South Wales team on at CommBank Stadium.
And we know that right now Parramatta have 2 prospective New South Wales candidates in Pearson and Kennedy Charrington. It'd be nice to know if we have any more, which hopefully we can get done in the the coming weeks and days. But yeah, I mean, New South Wales and Queensland for the Women's State of Origin have really been putting on shows for the last couple of years. The game's been high quality, physical, fast, tough, everything you associate with the male arena, and they're really making it their own, which has been fantastic for the women's space. And the fact that they're spreading it out to closer to a proper series now was really something that's been in the works for a while. So cool to see them get the 2 games. and eventually, obviously, it'll go it'll go up to 3 games as well to mirror the men. But yeah, big steps here for the game, for the code, and really looking forward to that first game out at CommBank Stadium.
Yeah, it gives them an opportunity to see what sort of attendance they're going to attract at a somewhat larger stadium.
After North Sydney Oval being the venue. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I mean, North Sydney Oval, as picturesque as it is still a stadium that's in the mould of Leichhardt Oval in terms of facilities.
I think for the women here, like you said, North Sydney Oval, classic stadium, classic venue. There's so much history there, but think about it from the 2 teams going to participate here. If this is a sellout or close enough to, we know what CommBank's like when you get 15K plus. You know, the noise starts bouncing and reverbing and going crazy. They'll be getting goosebumps. It'll be a game unlike anything they've played in their careers.
Yeah. Well, I guess some of those women that were able to play in last year's NRL Grand Final, when there was what was the crowd? It was in
40?
the vicinity of 45,000 when they were playing. So they had that sense of playing in front of a big crowd, but that was a big crowd that were mixed in their allegiances. That's because the Penrith supporters that were in there, they weren't interested in cheering on the match between the Eels
and the Knights.
Maybe they might have got behind the Knights just to,
to stick it to
their typical manner of how they feel about Parramatta.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah, but they're not really invested in that game. What you're going to see out there is an attendance that you would imagine is mostly going to be invested in cheering on the New South Wales Origin team. And yeah, let's hope that they get a really big attendance there and keep growing the game as a standalone product, because that's really where we want to see the game grow, is that it gets recognised for the high quality of rugby league that it is, and that it doesn't need to have the men's game to prop it up in any way, shape or form. And we're not suggesting that the men's game props it up. We're saying let's get this game on the pedestal that it deserves to be on. So looking forward to that one. A couple of other bits and pieces floating around in the NRL. The rumour of Kyle Flanagan maybe heading over to Manly to join his father who's on the coaching staff over there. Thoughts, fellas? Is it just at the rumour stage? Not really what you'd call ground shaking.
I think this
news.
One came via the mole, so he tends to have his ear close to the ground, and he gets bad mail and good mail, but he's probably more consistent than most. I mean, Flanagan's days at the Dogs are numbered, aren't they? He just got dropped this week out of the team after getting shifted to 5'8" to make way for an expanded role for Matt Burton. I don't know if it's because he's not a good fit at the team. He struggled at the Roosters too. Going back to where his old man is might be for the best for him. It might be for the worst. I don't know. Maybe he might be one of those players that would benefit from time in the Super League, maybe, and a chance to open up the game there and then come back, kind of like what happened to Jackson Hastings, where he was a very highly touted young half, didn't really ignite the NRL the way he wanted to when he made his first run through the NRL, went over there to the Super League. I think he was at the Man of Steel over there, and then came back and has been pretty. I know he's bounced through clubs, but that might be a factor of personality clashes more than anything else, because his on-field play has been pretty good.
Yeah. And then, of course, we've also had the news about Nelson Asofa-Solomona extending his time at the Storm.
Yeah, pretty big news, that one. There was, I guess, a suggestion that he'd be lost at the Storm, either potentially the rugby union or maybe even another club, but he's inked a new 4-year deal. And we get to continue heading on him every time he comes to CommBank Stadium.
Yeah. We also had, I'm just trying to think of I've got a mental blank on the St. George props name that's just linked with the Dolphins for next year as well. That's news on that was just leaking through this afternoon.
Josh Kerr, 60, signing in what looks to be a 2-year deal with the Dolphins.
Yeah. Could he have been a player that you would have liked to have seen the Eels pursue to strengthen the depth in the middle for our club.
I don't think it would have been an outrageous suggestion.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not necessarily a name that immediately jumps out at you, but you can start creating the argument when you look at it a little bit below the surface. And it's an interesting one for the Dolphins as well, gents. They've got quite a few middles on their books. I'm not sure if there's maybe a progression plan in place. Maybe some other players might be moving on at season's end, or whether they've got the ability to have this level of depth, and the players are happy to sign on and be a part of that.
Well, they do have some senior players, like really senior players that they recruited from the Storm. So maybe there's a bit of a succession plan in place there. So, but that pretty much takes us through what's happening in Paradise and in the NRL. But now we're going to launch into the preview section of this massive podcast. 40, I'm going to throw it over to you for the team lists and to take us through the preview.
And for anyone looking for an SG Ball Grand Final preview, we have a standalone podcast that is already out there, so check that out on the Cumberland Throw. You can catch us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and iTunes now. Make sure to get that one there because we have a great chat with Nathan Brown about the junior representative campaigns for the Tasha Gow, Harold Matts, and SG Ball with a look at that Grand Final and beyond. But let's start with the Jersey Flag this week, boys. Parramatta Eels coming off a bye. Was it a bye for them? It was a bye for them, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, coming off a bye. They host the Newcastle Knights. This one's going to clash with the SG Ball Grand Final, unfortunately, 60s, and that includes the New South Wales Cup game too. So we won't be out there at Kellyville to see these games. This one is actually chronologically the final game kicking off on Saturday, 3 p.m. kickoff, actually being the main event to the curtain raise that is the New South Wales Cup this week. Eels hosting the Knights.
Mate, they just if I could just jump in there, I don't think the New South Wales Rugby League could have had the timing any better to make it impossible
to
get
catch these games
to either venue. We would have liked to have had a scenario where we could have covered at least one of the games at Kellyville on Saturday, but unfortunately the kickoff times literally make it impossible to
go from
get from one
to
venue to the other.
Exactly. But yeah, 3 o'clock kickoff here, boys. Let's just go through the team quickly. Lindsay Munro is the fullback. Matthew Komalafe, Lene Federica on the flanks. Tawarri Williams is back, which is a nice boost for that back line. He'll join William Latu in the centres. Ned Hicks and Mac Pulfisi are in the halves. Noah Reid, Jonte Jr., Bethan Mees are the two bookends. Jacob Davis starts at dummy half. Captain the team on the edge, Jock Brazel. He'll be on the left. Max Tupou will be the right edge back rower. Nicholas Lenars is the lock forward that can also play a bit of dummy half. On the interchange, Damien Nati, Tyson Chase, Nick Raffo, and Lachlan Mears-Crabbe. Larry Mwanga Tutia is the 18th man. They're taking on the Newcastle Knights. If I just bring up the ladder here, boys, check out how they're travelling in the Jersey Flag. Will be positioned in, there's the Jersey Flag Cup, coming in at 10 out of 12. So there are a few spots behind the Eels who sit in 6th place coming into this round. Just 2 wins for the Knights from their 7 games played. They do have a bye to their name like the Eels. Parramatta 4-3 on the season to date. Had a 4-game win streak that was snapped by a tough loss to the Bulldogs. And now we look to get back on track against the Newcastle Knights. I'm just looking at that Newcastle team, seeing if there's any names we might spot. Simon Tito jumps out. Was he a Parramatta player?
I don't remember
There's
that name.
There's a Sewer, and yeah. But yeah, Tito does jump out to me. He might have been a Penrith player. So yeah, I see him in some Penrith gear here. So that's maybe why I know him. And maybe Manly too. So he might have bounced around a bit. But yeah, the Parramatta Eels, look, it's a home game here, 60s. The way they played football this year, even in that loss to the Dogs where they weren't at their best, you'd expect them to get the job done if they can continue to play the brand that has done so well for them so far.
It's been a real effort-based performance. And also, I think they've done a good job of following match plans. They've really stuck to what Coach Brennan's identified in the tip sheet for them and gone out there, just done their job. And we weren't able to be at their last match at Cabramatta because
another clash.
Again, it was we're at Campbelltown for the junior reps, first week of the finals football. So that's unfortunate. We'd like to be able to cover as many matches as we can of the lower grades. But in the rounds before that, it was really a case, as I said, of them executing exactly what the coach was looking for. Yes, you're going to get those periods in a game where things sort of go a little bit off the rails, and especially when we're talking about age football. But I'd expect them to. They've had a good couple of weeks off. They would have recharged the batteries. A few niggles. They would have had a chance to get over a bit. They'd be resetting. Some of the players might be looking at the SG ball and thinking, oh, there's some blokes that will be coming and joining the squad soon. So it might be a case of, look, I'll keep showing you what I can do, because I think there's possibly been an element of that. They're just like the SG ball is a tight unit. It seems like this squad have really bought into playing for each other. So, look, I'd like to think they're going to get the job done again this week.
Mm-hmm. Quinn, anything to add to that, mate?
Yeah, look, it's been real nice to see. I don't want to necessarily call it a renaissance, but certainly a team performing well at the jersey flag level. We've kind of just hovered around that position the last few years of trying to make the cusp of the final series, and to see that. I think we touched on it last week, gents. That Parramatta spirit really shined through. And after this week, there will be some SG ball, I guess, graduates that certainly put their hand up for selection there. So look, things are looking up, and you'd like to think that we get the job done here on against the Knights.
And that brings us to the second game in terms of seniority, but the first game on the day, 1 o'clock kickoff out at Kellyville for the Parramatta Eels in the New South Wales Cup, hosting the Newcastle Knights again. In fact, it's all grades against Newcastle right down to the SG Ball final, which is a real funny coincidence right there, but a cool little twist to the day. Eels coming off that heavy defeat at the hands of the New Zealand Warriors, boys. They shape up like this. At fullback, it's Dejan Arce. Joshua Minhinnick holds down one wing, but to be announced is the other winger right now. And while that worked really well for the Queenslanders that one time, I don't know how it's going to fare for the Eels. Isaac Lumi and Zach Sini, they're in the centres. Rankin and Arthur, the two playmakers. In the front row, we see a change. Manny Luke comes into the starting team to replace Jaden Yates. No sign of Mitch Rain in the dummy half role there. In the front row, Offahi Ogden will partner Luca Moretti. No Kai Rodwell this week. In the back row, Tony Mattelli comes back into the starting team. He'll partner Jack Murchie on the edges. Dan Keir is a lock forward. On the interchange, I mentioned him already, but Jaden Yates, he's joined by Tavita Taumapenu, Jira Momasia, and Nico Apelu. They're taking on a Newcastle team. Again, if I just check my notes quickly, that come into the ladder here.
I think the Knights are sitting last on the table.
Running stone cold, motherless last. Just the one win from their 8 games. So they're doing it tough. Negative 145 for and against. I tell you what, though, if there's a way for the Eels to lose this one right now, the Knights still haven't had a good time. But looking at that team, players that stand out, I think Bowie Hodgson's a fairly young player with some raps, but Heimel Hunt, there's an NRL player, Adam Clune's another one. Jack Johns, obviously, has seen a bit of play this year. But they're actually, and there's a former Parramatta Eel there and David Hollis on the interchange. They're probably a bit short on NRL experience in this team. You can see why they're running last in the New South Wales Cup.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you go there, Sixties.
No, I was just going to observe that there was last week. It seemed that it was the Eels really chopped and changed the team a bit. There were players didn't go over to New Zealand. There was late change to the lineup. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think Dejan Arce ended up playing in the halves last week.
And Lumi might have gone to fullback.
That was as I recall we didn't get to see the footage for how they actually played.
Dejan and Jake in the halves. Lumi at fullback. Komalafi comes into the team, and he was there with Sam Loizu, who, given that Loizu is not named and Komalafi is, you'd think that either Loizu's been held in reserve in this game or Komalafi will come back into this team.
Yeah. So, it was. I don't know whether we just have to put last week's down as just one of those awful, awful games that a team has to very quickly put behind them and just move on. I don't know that there's too much you'd learn out of that other than stop arm grabbing in defence. I suspect their confidence is down quite a bit. You'd hope that they don't have a case of thinking they just have to turn up to get the job done against the Knights, given where the Knights sit on the table. Look, I honestly don't know what to expect this week from the team. If you had spoken to me about 3 weeks ago, I would have said you'd see a lot of effort from the team. But you can't say that what we've seen from the last 2 weeks is high in the effort stakes. So,
not at all. And you consider, the Knights are running last, 13th versus Parramatta running 9th there in the New South Wales Cup. But, it's the worst points differential against the second worst points differential.
Yeah, and that's really as a result. Parramatta's copped 3 hidings this season. They copped a hiding from the Jets in the first round. They copped a hiding from the Bulldogs, and they copped a hiding now from the Warriors. In amongst that, somehow, was a victory over the Panthers.
Yeah, very good. I mean, isn't it funny how that probably lined up for all 3 grades with their best performances? I mean, and to the Fleg's credit, they've probably got a couple other good wins under the belt too, but for the NRL at least, alongside the Cup, that was easily their best performances of the season.
Yeah, there was no fluke in it. They didn't have luck go their way. That was just a quality performance. So, I mean, that's why I said I can't make a call on this. I honestly can't make a call. If they play anywhere near their best, they get the job done. They get the job done easy. But are they going to play at their best? I don't know. Honestly, don't know. So, but look, I hadn't seen much of the dummy half. His name escapes me, John. The dummy half for the Eels.
Jacob
this week.
Davis? Oh, you meant in NRL?
Menai Luke.
Menai Luke, yeah, sorry.
Manny Luke, Manny Luke. So, is he related to Sonny Luke?
Perhaps. I couldn't see any connection in terms of like the player database there, but it's a same surname, similar first name, so it seems like it's
both were linked
from the
with
Penrith district. Yeah, so seems like it's far from a terrible conclusion to draw. So, yeah.
So look, I don't think it's too much. I don't think I'm giving away anything to say that I watched a bit of the training tonight before we got into the podcast, and I actually liked what I saw from Manny Luke tonight in training. So obviously he played last week, and we can't say that he was able to help stem the flow or to create points for the Eels last week. But I liked what I saw out of him from him on the training track tonight. So, but apart from that, again, we need the Eels to turn up and play their best football. We don't need the sort of performances that we've seen against the Jets, the Bulldogs, and then the Warriors.
No, sir. And that brings us to the main event of the weekend, kicking off on Friday in the bad slot for people coming from their 9 to 5, the 6 o'clock kickoff out at CommBank Stadium. Parramatta Eels in 13th, hosting the 12th place Newcastle Knights. Let's quickly run through the Newcastle lineup and then I'll get to the Eels, boys. Newcastle start with Lockie Miller at fullback, Dom Young and Greg Marzu on the wings. Dan Gagai and Bradman Best round out a pretty handy backline, if I'm going to be honest. In the halves, Kalen Ponga made his return from concussion against the Cowboys successfully, and he'll partner Jackson Hastings at halfback there. In the front row, Daniel Saifidi, Leo Thompson, who I'm not very familiar with, but they're the 2 bookends there. Saifidi, obviously a class bookend. Phoenix Crossland is a dummy half because you talk about cursed players, but poor Jaden Brayley again with the bad injury. Very, very rough. I feel for him. In the back row, the ageless Tyson Frizzell, Lachlan Fitzgibbon and Kurt Mann, one of those super utilities. He'll be at lock forward. Tyson Gamble, Jacob Saifidi, Matt Croker and Jack Heverington are on the interchange. Simi Sasangi, Heimel Hunt, Jack Johns, Dylan Lucas and Adam Clune, the extended bench or the shadow bench, however you want to call it. For the Eels boys, We've got a couple of changes. Well, yeah, we've got 2 changes, right? Because we have the Cat 1 concussion for Bailey and, unfortunately, that groin injury for Reg, which means at fullback, as always, the tireless Quinton Gufferson. On the wings, Micah Siva will be on the left edge. Hayes Dunster gets the call-up back in the first grade to replace Bailey, which means Sean Russell gets pushed into the centres where he'll partner Will Penasini. And I say partner boys, but obviously they're on the opposite edges. Dylan Brown and Mitchell Moses in the halves. In the front row, you talk about opportunity knocking. Wiramu Greg gets another start this year. His other start against the Roosters, I thought he was very good. Need to see some more of that. He'll work with Junior Barlow. Josh Hodgson as a dummy half. I know there's a bit of talk about whether Hands should be starting over Hodjo boys. We can talk about that shortly. In the back row, Sean Lane and Ryan Madison. Maddo pushing out onto the edge once again with Jermaine Hopgood starting at lock forward. On the interchange, Bryce Cartwright, Brendan Hands, Matt Dury, Makahesi Makatoa. Maka, the player, caught in to replace the injured Reagan Campbell-Gillard by virtue of that series of swaps and changes and whatnot. Extended roster, Jake Arthur, Jack Murchie, Offa Hickey Ogden, Dejan Arce and Isaac Lumi. Main official is Chris Sutton. We've got Chris Butler in the box. And I'll let you guys start talking about what that means in terms of the 2 rosters, boys.
Would you suggest, or I'm going to pose a question to both of you to start off with. Would you suggest that the Knights have the edge in the back line and the Eels have the edge in the forwards?
Most likely.
Knights have the edge in the back line. If Reg was here, the Eels have a runaway advantage in the forward pack. Without Reg, and given that Junior's probably playing below his best right now, it probably evens up more than I'd care to say.
Absolutely. And you mentioned before, as you're going through the team list, you weren't too familiar with Leo Thompson. I've watched a couple of his performances, and he more than holds his own. He'll do a job for them. But back on the Newcastle back line, gents, I just wanted to raise their outside backs this year. Lachlan Miller, 195 metres per game. Dominic Young, 141 metres per game. Dan Gagai, 179 metres per game. Bradman Best, 134 metres per game. And Greg Marzu, 194 metres per game. We mentioned only last week, or probably a couple of weeks ago, I think it was going into the Tigers Easter Monday clash, in fact, that we weren't getting enough out of the yardage game from our outside backs or our back 5. I've just gone through the stat line of the Newcastle back 5. There's some impressive numbers there.
That's some Penrith tier production right there.
Absolutely. And because of that, that edge or that slight edge that we have in the forward pack that we're initially alluding to, we're coming up a Newcastle forward pack that isn't having to carry the load as much in attack. It's a little bit fresher for defense, and can front load some of those efforts into their line speed. We're going to be challenged in this one, boys. This is going to be a tough game.
Yeah, I'm just having a look now at the run meters for the average run meters for our players in those positions. Hayes Dunster, 84.5 metres per game. Gutho, 128 run meters per game. Will Penasini, 130. Sean Russell, 82. Micah Sivo, 116. Yeah. Those numbers are really down on what the Knights are producing. Yeah. Now, there was a really good article out of the Rugby League eye test this week about the
phenomenal article.
Yeah, and it really highlighted, first of all, the workload that's there for the Eels forwards, and then how opposition teams are saying, oh, you like to do a lot of the bulk of the work here, have some more. We'll take our attack directly through the middle. So you've got opposition teams now, not just, we can have always considered that the Eels forwards to be a point of strength, but teams are now deliberately looking to tire out our forwards by taking the game to them. And it's a fair comment. I mean, we're still making total meters that is up there as far as what we should be, but the work is getting harder for those Eels middles that are averaging less runs per meter, less meters per run than what they have in the past, and they're not really getting that support by the back five getting the run meters that might save a bit of their workload.
No, spot on. And the Parramatta strength is their forward pack, but if a forward pack is performing under fatigue because of the extra loading that they're taking on, they're not going to be at their best. So it's a frustrating little conundrum, because while the answer is so simple, right? The backs have to run more. Realistically, it's just not translating that way. So going to need them to step up some way, somehow, especially with the absence of Reagan Campbell-Gillard now, because you don't want to then see, like Quint sort of talked about earlier, you don't want to see Junior buckling under the pressure of that extra load now. So they've got to step up here big time. And, for Russell and Dunster, there's some demons to exercise too. Sean has got a case, I don't know if it's a full-blown yips, but he's struggling on the high ball. And he's a player that we've seen not do that 60s for years. Coming through the junior reps, he was, very strong on the high ball. But now in first grade, he's got that in his mind. Hayes, unfortunately, well, for him, it's just a matter of time, isn't it? He is not back at his best physically, and he's being thrust into a position that we didn't really want to put him into, but necessity has enforced it. So he just needs to, work hard and minimise the disadvantage that he is playing with right now physically.
Yeah, and look, we've got some other concerns there as well, that we've got players that are missing far too many tackles. Josh Hodgson's averaging 5.3 missed tackles per game. Jermaine Hopgood is averaging 3.6 missed tackles per game. They're players that are in the middle. And in comparison, the Knights, the only player that's anywhere near that for them is Tyson Gamble, who misses 3.8 tackles per game, but he's a half, and you'd expect that to feature from a half, because we've got Mitch Moses. He's missing an average 3 tackles per game. There's a bit of a faux pas there, wasn't it? Coming out with his manager there. So there's a lot that's not going right for the Eels at the moment, and it's that let's talk to the obvious, which is a lot of us expected that we might see a reversal of who starts and who comes off the interchange in that dummy half role. I think we were expecting that maybe Brendan Hands would start the game and Josh Hodgson would come off the bench after the team start to tire a little bit. It would seem that that's not going to be the case this week. I must say that I thought that after Hodgson was replaced last week, that it also marked that point in the game where we started to be a bit tidier around the middle in defence and against the Broncos. So I do have concerns that it looks like it's going to stay with the same starting, with Hodgson starting and Hands coming off the interchange.
Yeah, there might be the last minute change, but the team list suggests that it will be what it will be, and it's not often that Brad deviates from the 17 that he names unless it's necessitated. But adding to that, gents, we touched on Hodgson and Hopgood in the middle and their missed tackle rates, but I wouldn't call Wiremu, Greg, or Junior Paulo the most mobile or players with the best lateral movement either. So you add those missed tackle rates in around players who probably require a little bit more support, certainly as they start to fatigue. Does that issue compound?
Yeah, well, Paulo's got an average of 3.3 missed tackles per game. Wiramu's not too bad because his minutes have been down. He's only down for 0.7 missed tackles per game, but then again, he's only making 12.3 tackles per game, as opposed to Junior is down at 1.3, not 3.3, 1.3 missed tackles per game. So look, they're not too bad at the moment. But as you noted, they're not right up there when it comes to lateral movement, and where that becomes an issue is mightn't appear in the stats. If they can't actually get there, it's not going down as a missed tackle. If they're not in a position,
if they're not attempting it.
Yeah, if they're not attempting the tackle, it's not a missed tackle. And we saw last week against the Broncos that, especially with that try where we overplayed the Broncos were awake to our kick pressure, and we saw that try that was scored by
Reynolds.
I think it was Reynolds that scored the try.
Reynolds shifted to Mam.
Yeah.
And Reg bizarrely went for the intercept while Hodgson made a poor tackle, and he got that flick pass back inside to Reynolds. So, yeah, the decision-making process is every bit as important as the actual tackle process, isn't it, boys?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it may well be in that in those circumstances that with a bit of heat and humidity, that the players were looking for an easier way out of it. You know, Reg is looking for the intercept. Hodgson's barely getting hands on the tackle. You know, it was almost like in that first half, the commitment to get things done seemed non-existent. And we didn't get into talking too much about taking the folly of taking the game to Darwin. We've probably done that to death a little bit. the Eels are just locked in. We're just locked in for another few years.
Like we said, Sixties, can we just not pick the red-hot informed Queensland team of the season to take the Darwin? The Cowboys last year, the Broncos this year, and obviously, you know, no 5-day turnarounds as well. That'd be nice as well.
Well, the Titans are a Queensland opponent, so let's go there next year.
God, imagine if we actually willed the Titans into being the best Queensland team next year by taking them to Darwin. Maybe that's the metric.
I hope you guys are knocking on wood again.
Yeah, I'm firmly planted to my oak desk here.
Yeah. So how are we expecting this game to play out then, fellas?
This is a danger game, boys. Newcastle are not chump change this year. They're playing good football. They're competing really aggressively on both sides of the ball. If in the first half against Penrith a few weeks ago, they really stuck it to the Panthers, and they fell away in the second half, and that might be where the Eels have some opportunities. But they're a team that's having a red hot crack this year, and the way Parramatta are playing, that makes them a real threat.
Yeah, it's so much of this game for me. So much of this game is going to come down to the performance of the spine and the performance of our two starting middles, and I guess to an extent what Hopgood is able to contribute as well as a middle player. We've had some. The recent inclusions of Sean Russell and Hayes Dunster, both of those players have had their issues out wide, and we've seen that it only takes a mistake or two for teams to put on a try. It took the drop of Sean Russell last week, and it was a try on the platter that was there. Tackles that are missed or inability to turn and chase or as fast as, like, we know Hayes is not back to this pace that he had. We have to be patient with Hayes. For him to get back to where he was before the injury, it's going to take, I think, a good 12 months. And most judges will say that when you're coming back from an ACL, let alone every ligament done in your knee like Hayes did, you have to have patience. The player, it's a long journey to get back to where the player used to be. Some players don't get back to it. So, he's not quite who he was as yet. And we have to be a bit patient there. But they took advantage of that with that kick in behind him with the turn and chase. The Broncos kicking game against our outside backs just worked to perfection, didn't it, last week? So, like you, I do see this as a danger game, 40. I'm almost reluctant to give a tip this week. I'm certainly not going to be in the preview. I won't be given a punting tip. I've got zero confidence in what I think is going to happen out there. I think we are going to need to execute at our very best to get this job done, because the Knights even though they didn't win last week, they are playing a better brand of football in 2023 than they have for some time. And they're getting the best out of players like Greg Marzu. He's playing some of the best football that we've seen him play. Now, we're not watching him as closely as we used to when he was playing in the lower grades with Parramatta, and he had some issues around his defence. Whether that still exists, well, I guess the coaches would have done their homework on it.
I think, based on what I've seen, there are still opportunities to attack Greg, both aerially where he might cough up the ball and defensively where he might make a bad decision. But the scary thing is that the way he plays, he can absolutely eat up our defence. So
yeah.
And I think he's averaging close to 200 metres a game, like Clint said, but probably the number that we didn't see there, if I can just find it quickly. Where are we?
Tackle breaks?
Yeah, tackle breaks. He's actually, okay. No, he's got plenty. I saw line breaks. I saw 2, 2, 2, and 1, and then nothing. I'm like, yeah, that's actually not that bad. But that's line breaks, which he's averaging 7 line breaks over he's played since round 4, so that's 5 games. So he's going at 1.4 a game, which is obviously a very, very good metric. But the tackle breaks, well, what's that, 30, 39. So he's 39 over his 5 games, so he's close to 8 tackle breaks a game. So that's scary. That's very scary.
Yeah, and
even more so when you consider the missed tackles happening in with some of our middle players.
Yep, yes, sir, and that's where he really thrives, is getting in behind the ruck and just causing havoc.
Yeah, so as I said, our middles and our spine, it's not rocket science to say that they're going to be critical. More so than ever, Mitch Moses' kicking game.
Big time.
And so Clint, your thoughts before we get to our predictions.
Well, coming into this, gents, I was having a chat with a friend of mine who's recently relocated up to the Hunter, and he's a big rugby league fan, a big Supercoach fan. He was actually an Eels season ticket holder last year. He's made the change across to Newcastle, given that he's relocated. And the thing that I immediately said to him was, I feel we have to complete our sets at levels. You always have to complete to win rugby league games. But for this particular match, I feel like we're going to have to complete at a level akin to what we did against the Panthers to get away with it. Newcastle are tremendous value at $2.75, and I'm loath to suggest that we should be, and any of the Eels faithful should be jumping on the opposition here. Definitely not suggesting that's the case, but that's quite big odds for a team that has shown quite a bit this year. And we're going over some of the stat line and as well as the form line. That's pretty good value for the neutral punters out there. But I see.
Clint, I do know an Eels supporter, and you know him quite well, who will always back the opposition. And
the old reverse psychology.
Yeah, but he will eat up those odds.
Absolutely.
That will be delicious odds for him. So,
we give him a great. We give our beloved Mitch a grade F every time for doing it. However, we do like that he chooses to sacrifice his hard-earned more often than not for the greater good of our club.
Although I think there was a year that he was able to buy a car at the end of the season of backing against Parramatta. So.
It's a fun story for all you listeners if you happen to catch our good friend Mitch Clark out there at Combank Stadium. Talk about how he bought the family car. But getting back to the discussion at hand, we're going to have to complete really highly, because that's the only thing that's going to limit the fatigue of our forward pack and the opposition taking advantage of our forward pack's fatiguing. Is we need to hold the ball a hell of a lot more than what we have. I'm looking at I said 90 before, but at least 85%. We do that. We give ourselves every opportunity to control field position, and from there we should be good enough to get the job done. But if we complete our stats anywhere at the rate that we did last week, or some of the other games earlier this year, it's going to be mighty tough for us. Newcastle will make it very hard. There's enough quality there, and we suggested some of the stat lines for for plays in key positions, and Newcastle's ability to take advantage of that, they will.
Are we ready for some predictions? I'll kick it off. If the Eels are to win, I'm thinking it's going to be a tight game in terms of the points difference, but I also think it'll be high scoring. I'll nominate Eels 28, Knights 26. John?
I am deeply concerned this will be one that gets away from us with the Reg injury and just a lack of troops in that top 30 really coming back to bite us on the backside. So naturally, if Parramatta win, they're going to win big. We'll go back to winning the prediction of winning big, boys. So it worked better for us when I was tipping the big wins. Parramatta 30, Newcastle 16.
Clint?
I'm cautiously optimistic, and weirdly, I agree with both of you, even though that doesn't necessarily sound it is sound logic in terms of my prediction. I probably see a reverse of the scoreline to what we had against the Broncos with a 26-16 victory to the Eels, on the caveat that we complete our sets.
Right. Okay. Now, first try scorer. I'm gonna stick with my prediction from last week and go Dylan Brown. Not for any reason, just he's got to be due to get a try. John?
I'm going to go to where I feel our best play happens, and that's with Will Penasini. I don't think he'll score one first. I think he'll set someone up, which means most likely Hayes on his outside or someone backing up on his inside. So maybe Guffo or Moses. Maybe I'll go Mitch Moses.
Okay, Clint?
Yeah, likewise, I tend to deviate towards the right edge as well, and I was going to stick solid with Will Penasini.
Okay. Now, best on field, I'm going to stick solid again, and I've said before it has to be won by our spine and our middles, but choosing between them, again, we need him to produce Dylan Brown.
You're not wrong about the spine needing to stand up, but I'll go with where the form has been, and I think that Ryan Madison's been one of our better players this year, and I think he'll continue to have a good start to this season.
Yep, Clint?
I'm looking for a response from Junior Paulo. I feel as though that in order for our team to get the chockies, he's going to have a big game, and I expect him to stand up.
Well, I think we're just about done with our preview podcast. Thank you for joining us, fellas. Again, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf at Northmead, and to star partners Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. And a reminder that we will be at Parramatta Leagues Club up in Jack's Bar and Grill immediately after full time. Allow about half an hour for us to get there from the stadium, to set up and be ready to go. Looking forward to seeing as many of you there as possible as we celebrate an Eels victory. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
And
Thank you.
Go get him, you bloody Eels.
And go you Eels.